Yep. Well, good evening from the Independence Live Studios. I'm Craig Dalzell from CommonWeal, and tonight we're going to be talking to you about the Public Finance Initiative. This is PFI, which you might have heard about. This was the system of loans that was set up in previous years to fund government projects like hospitals and schools, and they have not been proving very popular, and there's been several problems with them. So tonight we're going to be talking to Campbell Martin, who has produced a film called The Only Game in Town. We're going to be showing you the film, and then we're going to chat about some of the problems that have arisen with this system of finance.
Well, the Only Game in Town, Craig, it's a documentary which reveals what actually happened back in 2004 to 2006 when North Ayrshire Council decided to build 4 new schools using a public-private partnership method of funding the project. The film starts off basically by giving us a brief explanation of what the Private Finance Initiative and public-private partnerships actually are.
Yep.
And goes on to explain how I, as an MSP at the time, and local people got involved in trying to stop, not the entire project, but trying to stop North Ayrshire Council from building a new school on what was public football pitches, the only public football pitches serving Saltcoats and Ardrossan. And it was because we wanted to try and save an area of grass that we began to look at the project, and we began to look at the contract. And when we started to investigate, we started to uncover some really serious and worrying things about particularly one of the bidders. There was only 2 bidders for a £380 million contract, and we became very concerned about the status and the standing of one of the bidders. So the film reveals exactly what we discovered when we began to investigate more fully into the project and the contract.
Fascinating. So we're now going to switch over. We're going to watch the film, and then we're going to be discussing some of the things that have arisen from it, some of the things that we're going to be doing now going forwards, and hopefully if you want to send in your questions about PFI or about other aspects around that, please send them in and we'll try and answer them. So Kevin's now going to switch us over to the film, and I hope you enjoy it.
I'm Campbell Martin. I'm a journalist, but back in 2004 I was a member of this place, the Scottish Parliament. It was a very different time. We had a Labour-led Scottish Government in partnership with the Liberal Democrats under First Minister Jack McConnell. Labour also formed the UK Government. It was the time of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. The party had swept to power in a political landslide, and in what was portrayed as cool Britannia, suddenly a miraculous transformation began to affect towns and cities across the country. In virtually every part of the UK, Labour-run councils were building brand new schools. Health boards were constructing new hospitals. It seemed, on the face of it, that Labour had unearthed an economic miracle in the shape of a revamped private finance initiative. Renamed as public-private partnerships, the funding method allowed the Labour Party to deliver new facilities for local communities. But in the area I represented back in 2004, local people were not happy about plans to build a new school in Saltcoats. There was overwhelming opposition to Labour-run North Ayrshire Council's plan, which would see a new secondary school built on Lake Dykes playing fields, the only sports pitches serving the two towns of Saltcoats and Ardrossan.
As I joined local people attempting to save an area of grass, I had no idea what we were about to discover. Back in 2006, I had little idea either what a public-private partnership was, but along with others, I was about to find out.
As a journalist, I had to get my head around this, and it's really, at its root level, quite simple, I think. It's a method that successive governments have thought is a good idea of getting private sector investments, money from private companies, to help fund public sector projects like schools and hospitals.
Well, the Private Finance Initiative, or the Public-Private Partnership as it was renamed, is a way in which the UK government decided to keep major capital projects off balance sheet so it didn't count against the national debt. A way of funding capital projects. So in theory, one would think it might be a good idea, but the difficulty is that the government and organisations like health boards and local government actually were taken advantage of by private companies with their own cooperation, it has to be said. And so major projects were built at vastly extravagant cost.
Well, PFI and PPP for me is a huge drain on the public resources. The contracts came to light with me several years ago when local authorities were paying out huge amounts of money to service debts and service contracts for what seemed to be a very small amount of schools. And it caused us a huge amount of concern because we tried to track down where the money was going, who it was getting paid to, and we were getting very mixed answers. So the reality was for us, it just seemed to be initially a huge cost for very few buildings.
Well, I know the governments said at the time that it was a great scheme and value for money, but I think we know now that that's not really the case. Some people, on good evidence, have described it as a rip-off.
Even today, with all the investigative tools we have at our disposal, the secrecy surrounding the Public Finance Initiative and public-private partnerships makes it very difficult to put an exact figure on just how much of a rip-off the whole thing has been for the public purse. A UK Treasury document published in December 2016 lists the total value of active PFIs and PPPs in Scotland as being £5.6 billion. But the Treasury figure doesn't paint the full financial picture, far from it. The figure of £5.6 billion represents only the cost of actually building new schools and hospitals. Using PFIs or PPPs means councils and health boards sign up to long-term contracts where the private companies who built the schools and hospitals are also paid to maintain them, usually for 30 years. This means that while the Treasury figure puts the cost of Scotland's PFIs and PPPs at £5.6 billion, independent economists have calculated the true cost is actually around £36 billion. Of that figure, £21 billion is still to be paid by councils and health boards, which of course actually means £21 billion has still to be paid by Scottish taxpayers. This is money going from the public purse into the bank accounts of private companies and international financial organisations.
It would have been easier and cheaper to have borrowed from the public sector rather than the private sector. But for some reason, you know, in the sort of economic, political climate of the time, you know, neoliberal economic values, public sector was seen as bad and private sector was seen as good. Private sector were able to sell their skills, said they could do these things quicker, more efficiently, and so on. And that became the accepted ideology, the accepted belief of the day. And of course, they were introduced originally by the Conservative government and then taken on by the Labour government in the UK, who both found them a convenient way, or thought there would be a convenient way to get credit for building lots of schools and hospitals. In retrospect, it doesn't look so good.
This is St Matthew's Academy in Saltcoats. It's one of 4 schools built by North Ayrshire Council using a public-private partnership. It was also the school local people objected to because it was built on public football pitches at Leith Dykes playing fields. Back in 2004, John Hunter was one of the locals who formed the Leith Dykes residents group to fight North Ayrshire Council's plans.
Where I'm sitting right now, about 300 yards behind me, are the playing fields. So it was on my doorstep as well, so to speak. I had no problem with St Andrews getting a new school, none at all. Not indeed anybody else getting new schools or hospitals. My main opposition to this was based on, not ideology, but based on whether the public were going to get ripped off. I had been the chair of Saltcoats Community Council and for about 18 months or so, and people approached me to ask me if I would head up a focus group or a pressure group against building anything gigantic in the playing fields. A direct replacement for St Andrews would have been no problem whatsoever. Nobody objected to that. When the extent of the rebuild became apparent, and it was a merger of two schools, St Michael's and Kilwinning and St Andrews and Saltcoats, that would have required a very, very large replacement.
Another local man, Ronnie McNichol, also decided to get involved.
I became involved with Laydykes Residents Group after a parent approached me to say that North Ayrshire Council were going to build 4 new schools under the PPP contract, and we were going to lose the open space, green playing field land at Laydykes.
The Laydykes Residents Group became a very effective campaigning organisation, taking protests directly to the headquarters of North Ayrshire Council and organising a public march through Saltcoats, which culminated in a rally at Laydykes playing fields. So strong was the public backing for the Laydykes campaign, Ronnie McNichol and John Hunter were both subsequently elected as independent councillors on North Ayrshire Council.
However, despite the efforts of the Laydykes Residents Group and almost total opposition from local people, North Ayrshire Council proceeded with its plans to build 4 new schools. In July 2006, the Chief Executive of the Council signed a contract with First Class Consortium, a group of private sector companies, which committed the Council to pay £80 million for the construction of the 4 schools, and a further £300 million to maintain the facilities over the next 30 years. The total value of the contract signed by North Ayrshire Council was therefore £380 million. The schools were built, including St Matthew's Academy on Laydykes playing fields, and the maintenance contract kicked in. Quickly, it became clear just how paying for these 4 new schools was impacting on the total funding available to North Ayrshire Council, and this was a story repeated in every local authority that had embarked on building new facilities using PFIs or PPPs.
When we're going through budget proposals for councils, unfortunately now a huge amount of money is taken up servicing these contracts and these debts. So from there, the knock-on effect is that there is less money available for services, and that's of real concern because then it has an impact on jobs and it has an impact right across the local authority. So from there, we're really concerned about the levels of debt, the levels of payments that are being made, and they're increasing year upon year.
The impact on jobs and services has been quite significant. The budget of North Ayrshire Council in the financial year that's about to begin will be about £303 million, but about £13 million of that currently is going to service this PFI PPP debt. Now that's increased year on year since 2007-8 from 11.1 million and will continue to increase to 16.7 million by 2037-38. So it's impacting more and more on jobs and services every single year at a time of a great financial challenge.
In councils across the length and breadth of Scotland, jobs have been lost, services have been cut, and some have completely stopped as a result of local authorities having to pay PFI PPP bills. Written into the contracts signed by councils is that these debts take precedence over every other function. Local authorities must pay private companies behind their PFI PPP schools before they deliver any services to local taxpayers. In North Ayrshire, currently, the council must pay just over £1 million every month to its PPP provider. That's £1 million every month before the council can start delivering housing, education, social work, and the many other services needed by communities in an area that has one of Scotland's highest levels of poverty and unemployment.
It's definitely not best value for the public purse. It's about profit for private companies.
The decision to embark on a multi-million-pound schools construction project in North Ayrshire was taken following a procurement exercise governed by strict European Union procurement regulations. In addition, North Ayrshire Council's actions were overseen by the then Scottish Government's Financial Partnerships Unit, which, in turn, was scrutinised by Partnerships UK, a body established out of the UK Treasury at Westminster.
With such stringent oversight, the public would be forgiven for believing everything had to be above board and that the PPP contract awarded by North Ayrshire Council represented value for money for the public purse. But scratch the surface of North Ayrshire Council's schools PPP project and some shocking facts begin to emerge. The European Union procurement regulations, which governed how PFI PPP contracts were run, stipulated that procuring agencies, that's councils and health boards, must be able to show there was genuine competition for each contract. There had to be genuine competition to ensure councils and health boards got the best value for taxpayers. So let's take a closer look at the North Ayrshire Council Schools PPP project.
We've already seen that the £380 million contract to build 4 schools was awarded to First Class Consortium. This was a group of companies led initially by the German construction company Hochtief. During the procurement process for the contract, North Ayrshire Council had just one other bid from a Fife-based company called Comprehensive Estate Services Limited.
Despite there being only 2 bids for the contract, fewer than EU procurement regulations stated should be secured for a contract of this size and value, North Ayrshire Council argued that genuine competition had been achieved and that the local authority had secured value for money for the North Ayrshire taxpayers. Closer examination, however, suggests this was not the case. Having viewed bid documents we secured under Freedom of Information legislation, very serious questions began to emerge over the standing of Comprehensive Estate Services Limited, CES, the company that North Ayrshire Council claimed had provided genuine competition for its £380 million contract. The council argued CES had been a credible and viable bidder, pushing First Class Consortium to deliver a best value price to build 4 new schools. Once again though, closer examination shows that, far from being a credible and viable bidder to secure a £380 million construction contract, Comprehensive Estate Services Limited was actually a recently formed company with no office of its own. The headquarters address it gave in bid documents was actually the office of a chartered accountant in the Fife village of Strathmiglo. The chartered accountant in question told us he simply allowed Comprehensive Estate Services to use his office as a postal address. Comprehensive Estate Services Limited, as a newly formed company, had no accounts and had issued share capital valued at just £2. The company also had no experience of building or maintaining schools. Again, in documents secured by us under Freedom of Information legislation, it's revealed that in the first key stage review of North Ayrshire Council's procurement process, the local authority's own advisors said of Comprehensive Estate Services Limited, "The findings of the evaluation indicate that, based on the information provided, only one bid is capable of progressing to the ITN invitation to negotiate stage of the procurement." The advisors indicated the one bidder capable of progressing to the next stage was First Class Consortium. With regard to the only other bid received, the key stage review stated, "The Council's financial advisors have been unable to satisfy themselves that the Comprehensive Estates Limited CES bid has sufficient financial or economic standing necessary to pass the evaluation at this stage of the process." So, at the very first key stage review of the procurement process, North Ayrshire Council was told by its own advisors that Comprehensive Estate Services Limited did not have sufficient standing to remain in the bidding process. But later in the same document, the Council's advisors recorded that, having considered a range of options, including the exclusion of Comprehensive Estate Services and proceeding with just one bid, the Council decided that, while CES failed the evaluation criteria set out in this document, they may be permitted to proceed to ITN. Despite being told by their own advisors that Comprehensive Estate Services Limited failed to pass the first key stage review, North Ayrshire Council allowed the company to remain as one of only 2 bids received for its PPP schools project. At this point, we need to take a closer look at the bid documents submitted to North Ayrshire Council by Comprehensive Estate Services. We secured these documents under Freedom of Information legislation. Initially though, North Ayrshire Council refused to release the documents, but we appealed their decision to the Scottish Information Commissioner, who found in our favour. One key issue immediately stood out when we reviewed the paperwork submitted by Comprehensive Estate Services Limited. The Fife-based company claimed in its bid submission that it was a subsidiary of a Singapore headquartered construction company, CPG Corporation. North Ayrshire Council repeatedly stated publicly that as a subsidiary of CPG Corporation, CES had years of experience in building and maintaining schools in Singapore. The Comprehensive Estate Services bid documents also claimed that CPG Corporation held a majority shareholding in CES at 56%. However, back in 2006, during North Ayrshire Council's procurement process, we contacted Mr. Pang To Kang, President and Chief Executive Officer of CPG Corporation. In response, Mr. Pang stated, "Comprehensive Estate Services CES is not a subsidiary of CPG Corporation. There is no cross-shareholdings between CPG Corporation and CES." There can be no misinterpretation of what Mr. Pang said. Despite bid documents from Comprehensive Estate Services claiming CES was a subsidiary of CPG Corporation and that CPG Corporation held 56% of shares in CES, the Singapore company stated unequivocally, Comprehensive Estate Services is not a subsidiary of CPG Corporation and that there was no cross-shareholdings between the 2 companies. The claim by Comprehensive Estate Services Limited in the documents it submitted as part of its bid was clearly a lie. At the time, we told North Ayrshire Council of the response we had received from Mr. Pang of CPG Corporation. The Council took no action. So, we have North Ayrshire Council's own advisors telling the Council that Comprehensive Estate Services Limited did not have sufficient standing to progress beyond the first key stage review of its procurement process, and we told the local authority that the CES claim to be a subsidiary of CPG Corporation was a lie, but North Ayrshire Council still publicly argued that the bid from Comprehensive Estate Services Limited was credible and viable, and provided the legal requirement of genuine competition to the only other bid it had received, the one from First Class Consortium. Elsewhere in the bid documents submitted by Comprehensive Estate Services Limited, the company listed 3 referees whom it claimed would vouch for the competency of CES. We contacted all 3 of the referees listed by CES. All 3 responded, indicating they had not agreed to be referees for Comprehensive Estate Services Limited. None of the referees had ever heard of CES. Again, we drew this further lie to the attention of North Ayrshire Council. Again though, the local authority took no action and continued to publicly state that the bid from Comprehensive Estate Services Limited. As previously stated, we secured these documents from North Ayrshire Council under Freedom of Information legislation after the local authority had initially refused to release them. We have already established that the claim by Comprehensive Estate Services that it was a subsidiary of CPG Corporation was a lie, and that North Ayrshire Council had been made aware of this, but as can be seen, virtually every page of the CES bid relates to the business activities and company structure of CPG Corporation. Crucially, in order to qualify as a competent bidder under EU procurement regulations, a company must provide valid insurance documents relating to various aspects of the bid. These are copies of the actual insurance documents submitted by Comprehensive Estate Services to support its bid for the North Ayrshire contract. All of them are actually insurance documents downloaded from the website of CPG Corporation. All of them relate to the Singapore company. None of them even mention Comprehensive Estate Services, In fact, most of them were issued prior to the date that Comprehensive Estate Services was incorporated as a company, and most were already out of date when they were submitted to North Ayrshire Council. Again, this information was brought to the attention of North Ayrshire Council. Again, the local authority took no action and continued to claim the bid from Comprehensive Estate Services was credible and viable and provided the legally required genuine competition to the one received from First Class Consortium. It became clear that North Ayrshire Council was not prepared to take any action over the very serious issues raised with them regarding the bid submitted by Comprehensive Estate Services Limited, even though these matters seemed to show there was no genuine competition, no competition at all, for its multi-million-pound schools PPP contract. At this point in our investigation, I, along with Ronnie McNichol of the Lake Dykes Residents Group, met with the Area Procurator Fiscal at Kilmarnock. We presented him with all the information we had regarding Comprehensive Estate Services and the lies contained in its bid documents. The Fiscal instructed the then Strathclyde Police to carry out an investigation into the matter. But less than 2 weeks after the police were told to look into the issues, the Irvine Herald newspaper ran with a front page scoop headlined "Fraud Cops Drop Probe." Without either me or Ronnie McNichol having been spoken to by the police, the fraud squad had apparently concluded its investigation and found there was no evidence of criminality. The investigation was dropped. Following this, Ronnie McNichol and I arranged a second meeting with the Area Procurator Fiscal. We wanted to know how an investigation could have been carried out in less than 2 weeks, and why neither of us, as the complainers, had been interviewed. We were simply told, again, that the police had concluded their investigation and found there was no evidence of criminality. We were also told that Crown Council agreed, so the matter was closed. But at this meeting we had more evidence, not previously disclosed to the Fiscal or police. It was in a box file like this, and I presented it to the Area Fiscal. With one finger, the Fiscal pushed the box back across the table to me and said, "It's more than my job's worth to reopen this case." He hadn't even looked at the contents of the box file. Now, I have no record of the Fiscal's comments that day, but the phrase, "It's more than my job's worth to reopen this case," is exactly how both Ronnie McNichol and I remember the Fiscal's comments. So, until recently, that's how matters ended. Despite all of the evidence, including blatant lies, despite bid documents that related to a company not even involved in the procurement process, despite invalid insurance documents, despite referees stating they had nothing to do with the company that had preferred their names, despite CPG Corporation stating unequivocally that Comprehensive Estate Services Limited was not a subsidiary of CPG, North Ayrshire Council proceeded to award a contract valued at the time at £380 million. The contract went to First Class Consortium, but if North Ayrshire Council had not allowed the bid from Comprehensive Estate Services to remain until the very end, then there would have been only one bid for the contract. This would have meant the Council had no competition, none whatsoever, for its PPP contract. Recently, we once again collected together all of the evidence originally presented to the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service and Strathclyde Police back in 2006.
We spoke with two former senior detectives. Both former officers were shown and reviewed the original evidence submitted in 2006 to the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service and Strathclyde Police. These were the same documents that the Fiscal and Police found showed no evidence of criminality. One of the officers, a former member of the Strathclyde Police Fraud Squad, agreed to speak to us on condition of anonymity.
Based on the information and paperwork available in 2006, I would have expected the inquiry officer to initially focus attention on the common law crime of forgery and uttering. It's clear from the documents I was shown that the company incorporated as Comprehensive Estate Services Limited entered the tendering process in line with the procurement regulations in order to obtain the contract to construct 4 school buildings at various locations in North Ayrshire. In doing so, the company submitted documentation to North Ayrshire Council detailing their qualifications to undertake this type of construction. The inquiry officer would be expected to make inquiries of the officials from North Ayrshire Council to establish which route they took with the procurement process and how the tender bids were received and progressed. In any case, the documentation I was shown clearly indicates that someone from Comprehensive Estate Services Limited had deliberately forged, copied, altered and inserted false information on their application prior to uttering the document to North Ayrshire Council as genuine. Much of the information accompanying the application appears to be from the website of the CPG Corporation, which was based in Singapore. The documentation purports to show Comprehensive Estate Services Limited as a subsidiary of CPG Corporation, and further documentation and letters from 3 alleged referees are designed to support the bid, but confirmation from all 3 referees now shows they had no knowledge of the company Comprehensive Estate Services Limited, nor did any of them provide permission to use their individual names or business references in such an application. The forged document submitted to North Ayrshire Council was a clear and deliberate attempt by Comprehensive Estate Services Limited to win all or part of the construction contract and thereby to gain financially or enhance their reputation in the construction business. As such, a common law crime of forgery and uttering should have been investigated, and the principals of the company should have been traced and interviewed under caution.
John Sallin's police career saw him serve with the Metropolitan Police, Strathclyde Police and Police Scotland. Mr. Sallins, a detective sergeant, investigated some of Scotland's most high-profile crimes, including the 2007 terrorist attack on Glasgow Airport. He received 3 police commendations for his work.
Would it be normal in any investigation not to interview the people who had lodged the complaint?
Absolutely not. They're the first people to be interviewed, having made the complaint, known as a complainer. There should have been lengthy statements taken from them, and the investigation is based on what they say. And obviously, this being a complex investigation, the individuals making the complaint should have been spoken to at length and statements obtained from them.
Well, as you know, I was one of the people who lodged the complaints at that time, and I was never spoken to at all.
I can't understand that at all. I have no idea why that happened, but you should have been spoken to.
How could it have been possible to carry out an investigation into allegations made by me and another individual without even talking to us?
It's just not feasible. It's impossible. I mean, I don't know the reasoning for doing so, but that is not an investigation. To me, there's something in the background there. You should certainly have been spoken to at early stages. You should have been initial people that should have been spoken to by the police. And as I say, is anything that you'd have said should have been looked into and investigated properly. Any individual making a complaint, that's the first port of call in any inquiry. You speak to the complainer, you obtain a full statement from them, and then you base your inquiry on that.
And again, that never happened.
No, it never happened to yourself, I understand that.
Okay, if we move on to Comprehensive Estate Services, which was the company that submitted the second bid, supposedly a legitimate bid for a £380 million contract. Comprehensive Estate Services actually wasn't formed until after the council put out the invitation to tender for this multi-million-pound contract. They had no accounts, they had no office, they had paid up share capital valued at just £2, but they were bidding for a £380 million contract to build 4 schools. In documents submitted to North Ayrshire Council as part of the Comprehensive Estate Services bid, the company claimed to be a subsidiary of a major Singapore-based construction company, CPG Corporation. They claimed that in paperwork submitted to North Ayrshire Council that CPG Corporation owned 56% of Comprehensive Estate Services. So they said that CES was a subsidiary of the Singapore-based company, and that the Singapore-based company was the major shareholder. But the chief executive of CPG Corporation wrote to me when I asked him about this, and he said, and I quote again, "CES is not a subsidiary of CPG Corporation," and added, "There is no cross-shareholdings between CPG Corporation and CES." What do you think of that?
That's obviously the council an out-and-out lie. I mean, they've got to call into question the integrity of the whole situation here. I mean, that company's saying I've never heard of
CES, Comprehensive State
Services. So again, their integrity's got to be called into question. It's an out-and-out lie.
Surely there must be a law against a company submitting a bid for a multi-million-pound contract and telling a blatant lie in the paperwork they submitted. Surely that's worthy of a police investigation in its own.
It's a criminal offence. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's a fraud. And they're making a fraudulent claim. They're saying they're part of something they are not in order to obtain a contract.
And yet, there was no evidence of criminality.
As I said, I alluded to earlier, I've had a look through this, and the whole scenario is full of criminality, from the start to finish.
So could an investigation, a police investigation, have been carried out without even speaking to the directors of Comprehensive Estate Services?
Absolutely not. Again, as I said earlier, the complainer should have been spoken to, the directors of the Comprehensive Estate Services should have been spoken to, but there's numerous other people that should have been spoken to carry out a thorough investigation into the complaint that was made. But it's quite evident this hasn't happened.
Between the Procurator Fiscal instructing Strathclyde Police to carry out an inquiry and a local newspaper reporting the inquiry had concluded with the headline, "Fraud Cops Drop Probe," less than 2 weeks had expired. Is it possible to carry out an investigation of this nature in less than 2 weeks?
It's absolutely impossible. I mean, in a newspaper reporting that the inquiry is concluded, I mean, this inquiry is very complex by its nature. 2 weeks wouldn't even look at this. I mean, they wouldn't even look into the background work that would have to be carried out before the inquiry and the investigation earnest kicked off. I have no idea. They've closed that very quickly. But as far as I'm concerned, there's been no investigation carried out whatsoever. Absolutely not.
Leading on from what you just said there, I mean, you've reviewed some of the evidence that was presented to the Procurator Fiscal and to the police. Based on what you've seen, do you think there are any grounds for the Procurator Fiscal to conclude that there was no evidence of criminality?
Absolutely not. I mean, even a young police officer looking at this would clearly see that there's criminality from start to finish. I mean, we've got companies here saying that other companies have got no part of it. We've got divisional commanders contacting the executive, contacting the fiscal. We've got officers saying that they're friendly with people that are under investigation. It's absolutely full of criminality. And there's various aspects of this whole complex inquiry that are a separate criminal matter aside, apart from just the bidding for these contracts.
I suppose just finally, as a core question to the whole thing here, from what you've seen and the evidence and what you know about this case, do you think everything's above board?
Absolutely not. This is completely underhand. It was on here. This really does need a thorough investigation, reopened and examined again and investigated correctly. Something seriously underhand has happened here. With phantom contracts and etc., and withholding information. As I said, no transparency, no accountability, collusion between the individuals. It just stinks of a complete cover-up. I don't know what the agenda is, but there's something that seriously needs investigated.
The evidence is clear, just as clear now as it was back in 2006. So the question that has to be asked is, who had the power to order that no police investigation should be carried out? Who had sufficient power that led a Procurator Fiscal to say it was more than his job was worth to reopen the case? Who had power over the then Scottish Government's Financial Partnerships Unit? Who had such power that North Ayrshire Council, Strathclyde Police, the Crown Office, Procurator Fiscal Service and the Central Government Civil Service in Scotland would allow this matter to be covered up? In this programme, We had hoped to provide answers to those questions. We asked North Ayrshire Council to provide a spokesperson for interview. The council declined. We also asked David O'Neill, the Labour leader of North Ayrshire Council during its PPP procurement process. Mr O'Neill declined to be interviewed. We asked the Confederation of Scottish Local Authorities to be interviewed. A spokesperson declined. We asked Mr Andrew Caskey to be interviewed for this programme. Mr Caskey was the Scottish Government civil servant who provided guidance and instruction to North Ayrshire Council during the procurement of its schools PPP project. Mr Caskey replied, "Out of respect for my former employers, I'm afraid that I would not be prepared to discuss my work at the time." We asked the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service to provide a representative for interview. They declined. We asked Police Scotland to be interviewed for this programme. The police replied, "We will not provide a spokesperson for an on-camera interview for your documentary." In addition, the force representative referred to the supposed police inquiry of 2006 into the North Ayrshire Council Schools PPP project, stating, "We cannot confirm whether or not a police investigation was carried out." We also tried to contact Mr Richard Navrot, the Principal Director of Comprehensive Estate Services Limited. Mr Navrot has no publicly available residential address. He disappeared from the electoral register in Fife in 2012. The only publicly available address for Mr Navrot is the one provided by him to Companies House in relation to a current company of which he is the sole director. We wrote to Mr Navrot at that address, inviting him to be interviewed for this programme. Royal Mail was unable to deliver the letter because no one at the address would sign for it. The evidence of potential criminality in this matter is overwhelming. Back in 2006, North Ayrshire Council claimed it had 2 credible and viable bids for its multi-million-pound schools PPP project. In reality, it had only one such bid. There was no competition for a contract now costing North Ayrshire taxpayers £1 million every month. Despite claims to the contrary in 2006, there is now serious doubt as to whether or not the police carried out an investigation into the evidence supplied to it, and, of course, the Procurator Fiscal felt it was more than his job was worth to reopen the case. All these years later, every organisation involved in the North Ayrshire Schools PPP project and the supposed subsequent investigation still refuses to talk about it. So, again, the question is, who has the power to close down police investigations? Who has the power to control decisions of the Crown Office? Who has the power to smooth the way for local authorities when legally binding EU procurement regulations are being flouted? Well, what we do know is that the UK Labour government, led by Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, oversaw a massive expansion of PFI PPP deals. Under the Blair-Brown government, councils and health boards were told there was only one game in town. If they wanted to build new schools or hospitals, they had to use PFI PPP. Everything was done to achieve the short-term goal of making sure schools and hospitals were built, whatever the long-term cost. It seems all that mattered was Labour politicians could go into the next elections claiming to have performed an economic miracle and delivered new facilities for local communities. Meanwhile, the debt run up by mainly Labour councils remains to be paid by us, our children and our grandchildren. PFI PPP, the only game in town, has left taxpayers with an ongoing current bill of around £21 billion, mainly for schools that are worth only a fraction of that cost. The passage of time is likely to show that PFI PPP is one of the biggest ever rip-offs of public money, our money. In North Ayrshire, it's not too late for the Procurator Fiscal and Police to do what is right and carry out the investigation that should have been conducted back in 2006. Given the facts we have revealed in this programme, the cover-up has been blown.
And welcome back. So I can see from the comments there's been a little bit of a strength of feeling over this. We've got John saying I'm raging over this. Peter saying this is an utter disgrace. Helen saying somebody's feet has to be held to the fire. If fraud has been committed, bring them to task. So what happens next?
Well, the comments you just read, Craig, are pretty representative of the things that have been said to me. People who've watched the film, who met me in the street, have stopped me in the street and saying, what happens now? You know, people want action taken because of what they've seen in the film, because of what the film reveals. And as far as I'm concerned, there has to be a new police investigation, because it looks like criminality took place in the North Ayrshire PPP contract. It looks almost certainly that there was no police investigation at the time. So there has to be a fresh investigation. It has to look in depth at what we have revealed in this film. But I don't see a police investigation being a problem. I actually see a stumbling block being the Procurator Fiscal, because if there is a new investigation, it's a thorough investigation this time, it will reveal that the Procurator Fiscal colluded with the government civil servants to make sure that there wasn't an investigation the last time, to make sure that this was all covered up. So there has to be a fresh investigation. Kenneth Gibson, who appears in the film, the MSP for Cunningham North, where 3 of the 4 schools are located, Kenneth put down a motion in Parliament calling for a new investigation, and I'm hopeful that we will get some sort of action at a council level in North Ayrshire, because the councillors represent the people of North Ayrshire.
Yeah.
Councillors who've watched this film must see there is something far wrong and it should be investigated. So that's what I'm hoping for, that there will be a new and a thorough investigation carried out into what took place back in 2004 to 2006.
Yeah. So this motion, was this as a direct result of your film?
Well, yeah, Kenneth Gibson appears in the film, he contributed to it, and obviously he saw the end product, and he now knows exactly what we reveal in the film. There is no doubt in my mind that, you know, the evidence is there. We've got the evidence. We've proved that there were only 2 bids, one of which was complete nonsense. And so the police investigation should look at the standing of Comprehensive Estate Services, the second bid, the one that was fabricated, the one that was downloaded from the website of another company. A thorough police investigation would actually be targeted, I would think, initially at Comprehensive Estate Services and the directors of that company. But it then has to look at why the officers, the officials of North Ayrshire Council, who were told all about this, why they took no action at the time. In fact, why they did not call in the police at the time, because they should have. They had the responsibility, they were in office, they had the responsibility to call in the police at the time, and they didn't do it. And I can tell you, we didn't put it in the film, but I can tell you that the councillors on North Ayrshire Council at the time, there was 3 who sat on the PPP project board, and the leader of the council, the Labour leader of the council at the time, asked to see the final business case for the PFI contract and was told, no, you can't see it. He was told you can't see it until after the contract is signed, and the contract was signed by an unelected official. So the councillors didn't know what was going on. The councillors actually voted to go ahead with this project in North Ayrshire without knowing what they were voting on, because they weren't allowed to see the final business case.
I have heard that in other circumstances of PFI where councillors have maybe voted them on and voted them through, but they haven't had time to read the full details of the contract, or they haven't necessarily understood the full contract, because, you know, councillors are elected members of the public. They're not necessarily lawyers or contract experts, and these things can be very complicated. Do you think this is something that's maybe contributed to the problem?
Absolutely. It wasn't just councillors. Council officials were being railroaded into going down the PFI PPP route, but council officials didn't have the procurement skills necessary to run multi-million-pound contracts. So they were relying on the advice they were getting from the civil servants and the then Scottish Executive, the Scottish Government. And the civil servants and the Scottish Government were taking their direction from Partnerships UK, which was set up out of the UK Treasury in Westminster. If you trace this all the way back, it traces to the UK Treasury and to Gordon Brown. This was the man who embarked on this, economic miracle that he supposedly discovered to build these new schools and hospitals. But you're absolutely right in what you say. The councillors didn't know what was going on, didn't know how to run a contract. Council officials didn't know either. So the Scottish Executive civil servants were telling the council, this is what you do, this is what you have to do to comply with these things. But again, I didn't put it into the film, but it may feature in any police investigation. But I have a copy of an email between two civil servants in the Scottish Executive at the time. One of them, who was going to meet with the Chief Executive of North Ayrshire Council the next day and was asking, what should I tell the council? And the other civil servant said, the less the council knows, the better.
Now, you mentioned Gordon Brown, and while he didn't invent the idea of bringing PFI into these contracts that came with the government prior to him, he was responsible for expanding it. This is where the title of your film comes from, The Only Game in Town. Councils were told this is the only way you're getting money. What other funding mechanisms existed either at the time or around that time that councils could maybe have used? Were there any?
Well, they didn't get an option. They were told there's only one game in town and you have to use PFI, which became PPP under Labour. But 25, 26 years ago, something like that, I was a councillor in North Ayrshire, and I will remember that the councils used the Public Works Loans Board to fund capital projects. That's how all the council houses in Scotland were built, with loans from the Public Works Loans Board, which councils and other public authorities could borrow money at very low interest and repay it over a long period of time, something like 60 years for council houses, which brings in, unfortunately, most of the problems we face today stem back to Thatcher, and she was responsible for scrapping making sure that councils didn't use the Public Works Loan Board, and then they brought in PFI, and then Labour expanded it under PPP. So there was options there that councils could have used the Public Works Loans Board, but they were told no. If you want to build new schools, if you want to build new hospitals, you have to use PFI or PPP.
Yeah. How about now? I mean, what other similar projects are happening? I mean, how's funding happening right now? We know that the SNP has stopped using PFI, but what are they using as an alternative these days?
Well, the non-profit distribution method is how the SNP government funds capital projects at the moment, building schools and so on. Unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, the SNP model retains the core elements of PFI, PPP, and I would like to see the SNP move away from that method of funding and possibly look at funding projects, capital projects through bonds, government-backed security bonds, basically, to make it almost getting back to what it was when the councils borrowed from the government, and it kept things within the public sector and the private sector. As far as I'm concerned, I would like to see us back to public contracts being funded publicly and the contracts being carried out by Public Works. This element of bringing in the private sector is what has caused all the problems.
Yeah, this is where I get to blow CommonWeal's trumpet a little bit, because one of our big policy success stories of the last year has been the National Investment Bank. We published information about this in 2016, and it was picked up by the Scottish Government. It's now in this year's budget. It's getting funded to, I think, £340 million for over 2 years. Hopefully that will continue and it will allow the bank to grow its balance sheet. We are in the process now of developing a research programme on how we can use things like government-backed bonds to fund things like social housing and potentially other projects. So still maybe a few years away yet, but maybe there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, that's what I'd like to see. As I say, public works funded by the public, and public employees building the schools. You know, there's no reason why that couldn't happen.
Yeah.
It's what used to happen. So let's get back to that.
We've got a wee question here from Mitch, who's saying if the tax, basically asking where does the liability lie with these deals if the company folds. We're seeing Carillion right now is having problems. Well, it's looking as it's been liquidated now, and it was heavily involved in PFI. So essentially asking if the public purse bails out these companies when they fail and the government takes on the liability, well, what was the point?
Well, that's a very good point, because one of the arguments used by initially the Tories who established PFI and then the Labour Party who renamed it as PPP was that, you know, the risk would transfer to the private sector. So if there were any problems, the private sector would have to pick up the cost. But that's not the case. If Carillion was still heavily involved in PFI and had collapsed, as it did, then the government would have to step in. You know, these schools have to continue running, hospitals have to continue running. The assets would have to be returned to the public sector, and the public sector would have to foot the bill. You know, the private sector are taking the money here, but the risk didn't transfer. In fact, there's a point that in the North Ayrshire case, 25% of that contract is now owned by a company which has two intermediary companies registered in the British Virgin Islands. So I'm still looking at who owns the other 75% of the contract, but 25% of it has owned by this company with two companies in the British Virgin Islands. So essentially, I mean, I'm sure there are very good reasons for having companies in the Virgin Islands that are not related to tax avoidance or tax evasion, but at the moment it looks like 25% of the North Ayrshire contract is being paid by the taxpayers, and it's been offshored so they don't have to pay tax. So the private sector don't take on any of the risks. It's all the risks lie with the public sector, but the profits are being generated for the private sector.
Is it not also a worry that it's actually quite difficult to find out who owns that other 75%? Is that reflected over other PFI projects?
That's a massive problem. You know, trying to find out who owns these contracts, because I can tell you that at one time part of the North Ayrshire contract was owned by the man who owns Real Madrid. You know, why is the owner of Real Madrid buying into a contract in wee North Ayrshire? It's because it's worth it. They're making millions and millions of pounds from these contracts. That's why these big companies are buying into them. And even now, that 25% I'm talking about in the North Ayrshire contract, that was only purchased in late 2016. So 10 years into the contract, these big companies still think it's worth buying into these contracts because they know they're going to make massive profits on them.
Got another question here from Matt asking how many PFI projects are there in Scotland and how much are they costing? Now, I don't know if you know the answer off the top of your head.
The answer off the top of my head is far too many and far too much, but I don't know the total figure.
I think if I recall from the GERS figures, the last round of GERS figures, in August we were now paying over £1 billion a year in interest and service fees in Scotland, so maybe that gives you an idea of the scale of how many projects there are.
Well, you're talking about over the last 10, 15 years, virtually every school, virtually every hospital, and other public works have been built using PFI, PPP. So it's virtually everything that's been built.
Just a reminder to folk, if you've got any other questions on the film or on PFI in general, please send them in. We're watching on the wee pad here, and if you've been enjoying tonight, then please, I'm sure that Kevin has a donate button somewhere that it's supporters like yourself that keep Independence Live going. I know they've got a fundraiser going at the moment. Kevin will be annoyed that I did that, but you can live with it. Another question here from Jerry. Who pays for remedial work in a faulty building if it's PFI?
Well, I'm not an expert, but the contracts certainly, the contractors are obliged to repair and maintain the buildings. But obviously, that's another aspect of these contracts. They've got a maintenance contract for 30 years, so it's not in their interest to spend a lot of money as the contracts get towards the end of their term. So, you know, why would they maintain them to the top standard when they're just going to hand them back to the public sector after 30 years? You know?
I think we actually did see that where there were problems with a couple of the PFI built schools recently, where they had to go back in and do repairs on them, and I think the PFI companies did pick up the tab for that.
Well, I mean, when you go to the root of these contracts, they're built by companies who are not motivated by building schools. They're motivated by making profit. So they will do what they can to maximise their profits when they're building the schools, and then they'll do the same when they're maintaining the schools. They want to make as much money as possible out of these contracts. So the schools weren't built to the highest standards, and the maintenance contract means that they will do as little as they can to get away with it.
Do you think there was maybe also a problem with the regulation here, where there was maybe a failure on the government's part to ensure that the schools were built at a high standard? Could they have just set in the contract saying that the regulations must be yay high?
Well, I think the contracts stipulated that the public sector did have the final say on the standard of the schools being built. But again, you're talking about, the motivation wasn't, you know, give us a great school. It was just get the schools built, because as I said in the film, the whole point was just get the schools. But as far as the Labour Party, the Labour government at the time was concerned, was just get these schools built, get them built now, so that we can get into the next elections and say, look at us, we're great guys, we built these schools for you, vote for us. That was the whole motivation behind PFI, PPP. It was electoral, and it was ideology. It was ideological. It was to get the schools built at any cost, and then we'll worry about the cost later.
There was a bit of a financial fudge as well, wasn't there? Where, I mean, they were taking on these loans, but because it was through this PFI mechanism, it was sitting off the balance sheet, so it wasn't inflating the deficit. And whenever GERS comes out or the budget comes out, the deficit, that one headline that the newspapers latch onto, is the only thing people know about or care about sometimes. So if you can take some of that and you can throw it into another pile and hide it in plain sight, then...
I mean, you're more an expert on the finances than I am, Craig, but that was certainly it. I mean, it was a con. Yeah. It was a con. It was, we'll send them over there so they're off the balance sheet, but eventually the money's going to have to be paid, you know, and so it was just one massive con. Yeah.
I mean, I know from my own reading and the projects we've worked on that the total cost for PFI over the lifetime of these contracts is going to come to something like over £40 billion. Whereas if we had used, if the National Investment Bank had existed in the mid-90s, and they could have used the public loans, work loans, and they could have used the government bonds, because governments can borrow cheaper than anyone. They often set the rate for borrowing. It would have maybe only cost about 12 billion to build everything. So you could have saved 30 odd billion. Or looking at it another way, you could have built 4 times as many hospitals and schools by using the government money.
Well, again, look at the North Ayrshire contract. When it was signed, it was for £380 million. But as Kenneth Gibson says in the film, that's going up. It increases as it gets towards the end of the contract. So you're talking about, by the time that contract finishes in 2036, I think it is, it could be well over £400 million for 4 schools. It's just, it's insane.
And of course, with this ongoing bill every year on the council budget, councils have a very limited budget themselves, and they don't have a lot of tax powers. So, you know, what happens to the other public services as budgets get squeezed?
Well, every council in Scotland is cutting services right now. They're setting their budgets and they're cutting services. And part of the reason is that those that are embarked on PFI and PPP, for example in North Ayrshire, it's over £13 million a year it's costing the taxpayers in North Ayrshire. So over £1 million a month, as we said in the film, £1 million a month that North Ayrshire Council must pay before it starts delivering the services that people in North Ayrshire need. And North Ayrshire has one of the highest levels of poverty and deprivation in Scotland. They need money spent on services in the community, not going into the pockets of private companies and financial institutions that offshore their money so they don't have to pay tax.
I've got a question from Steve here, just asking, could these contracts be renegotiated or could they simply be renationalised and brought back into public ownership?
That's a very good question, and I think it's a difficult question to answer because you're looking at what would be the motivation for these companies to agree to sell the contracts back to the public sector, because they're guaranteed multi-million pound profits for 30 years, so why would they allow the contract to be terminated unless they were going to be recompensed in full? And I think possibly that's what would have to happen, that if the contracts were to be bought out, they would have to basically pay the full whack. I don't know for certain if that's the case, but it's certainly a worry that if, for example, the Labour Party says they're going to take all the PFI contracts back into public ownership, then what would be the bill for that?
Yeah, and again, it ties maybe back into the one of the previous questions is what then happens to the liabilities of the remedial work. And it's grim to say, but what happens if another school falls down the week after the contracts are renationalised?
Well, there's no doubt, obviously, if they were taken back into the public sector, then the public would have to foot the bill for all these repairs or rebuilding in some cases. And it just shows that these were never, ever a good deal for the public. This was all about making profit for private companies.
Of course, it's always very difficult when you're trying to do these long-term projects, when you are trying to plan for 30 years, because the politicians that sign the contracts are very rarely the ones that are in office when the contracts come to fruition.
Well, that's. I mean, I'm back to, as far as I'm concerned, the ideological thing was Gordon Brown's. He wanted to expand PFI into PPP and portray the Labour Party as this performers of this economic miracle. Yet, where's he? Yeah. You only hear from him, when there's an independence referendum on the way. But he's away off the scene. Tony Blair's away. All these people who embarked on these contracts, they're all gone. Even at council level, most of the councillors are all gone now. So they've left behind them this massive debt that the public are having to pay.
Yeah. A question here from Kenny asking about the outsourcing or subcontracting work. I'm not sure I know anything about that, but I guess you're if some of these companies operate the same way that Carillion has, then outsourcing and subcontracting is probably part of that. So then again, what happens if these companies run into trouble? Then you can have massive knock-on effects on the rest of the economy as they go down.
That's right, and they do subcontract. Mighty does a lot of the maintenance in these PFI contracts, but you're absolutely right. It's just a complete farce.
Yeah, and I suppose there's a question: if you've got a company that doesn't actually do much itself and all it does is mediate the contract and subcontract everything out, then really what's stopping the government just going directly to these subcontractors and get the work done that way?
Well, again, we'll come back to the North Ayrshire situation. The contract is managed by, I think it's North Ayrshire PPP Services, but they don't actually manage it because they're managed by another company called Infrastructure something Services Limited, I think. So there's two companies straight away who supposedly manage this contract. So why is there two companies? And they don't own the contract, So there's an awful lot of companies making an awful lot of money out of it, and that's just in North Ayrshire. It's replicated right across Scotland and the UK.
Got a question here from Rab talking about the dualling of the A92 under PFI. It's got a 30-year lease. what happens when the contract runs and the road has to be replaced. And I suppose you can generalise that to all the schools. We have replaced every school in the country. They've all got a 30-year lifespan. What happens on year 31?
You have to build them all over again. And let's hope we don't make the same mistakes.
So we need to get the groundwork in now to make sure that doesn't happen.
Absolutely.
We got any more questions coming through, or any more comments coming through? Yep. So, got one here. What can the average punter do now? Can they contact their local councillor, contact their MSP? Is there anything they can do to kick up a bit of fuss?
Well, I would like to think that certainly in North Ayrshire, the public contact their MSPs, their MPs, their councillors, and demand a new police investigation, a thorough police investigation. But across Scotland, I would like to think that people having watched this film might start to question, could something similar have happened in PFI, PPP projects in other councils and other health board areas? Start asking questions. Start asking to see the contract. Start asking questions of the councillors, of the council officials, because without asking questions, we would never have been able to make that film. So people in other areas of Scotland, please start asking questions.
And if they start saying that you can't see a certain bit of information, start asking them why you can't. Start submitting FOIs. And
well, we put in a freedom of information request to get the actual bid document from Comprehensive Estate Services, and the council refused. So we pursued it with the ombudsman. What's it, the name of the guy that? It's the Information Commissioner. Sorry, we pursued it with the Information Commissioner, and he found in our favour. So it's worth pursuing. You know, don't give up just because the council says no, you can't get that information. Don't accept that. Keep pursuing it and get the answers. And right across Scotland and indeed the UK, because their answers are needed. I'm sure this is not the only PPP project where something similar happened.
So, got a comment there from Walter Bain just saying great information, and well, thank you, Walter. I hope it has been. I hope others have found it very useful. Get the film shared. So get the message out there, and as you say, Campbell, start asking questions.
Absolutely.
And hopefully we can get a bit of light into this very murky world. So I hope you've enjoyed tonight. I think we'll finish up there. Again, Independence Live has a crowdfunder going, so if you want to see more of these interviews, these films, and everything else that Indie Live does, we couldn't have a Yes Movement without them. You know, if you can throw them a little bit of support, please do so. And thank you, Campbell, for coming in.
You're welcome.
And thank you, everyone, for watching.